I'm one of those people that naturally sees the big picture and the details and the patterns all at once. So although my journey was invigorated by my desire to better understand my situation and craft my future, I had this whole other component. Don't ask me where it came from. I guess just guidance, and that's how I got here with modern consciousness as well. But I had this whole other component that I really wanted to understand human nature at this much broader level. And so I sought about learning that. And I learned a lot about myself in the process. I learned a lot about our humanness in the process. And it's just been a remarkable adventure. I'm a completely different person than I was 10 years ago.
Divorce can feel like the end of the world, especially after a long-term marriage. For Stacie Shifflett, the implosion of her 28-year marriage left her shattered into a million pieces. She likens herself to Humpty Dumpty, wondering how she'd ever put herself back together again. But Stacie's story is one of resilience, intentional living, and personal growth, and it offers hope to anyone facing similar circumstances. Stacie is an entrepreneur, writer, and student of life. You can learn more about her on her website, modernconsciousness.com. Please welcome her to Bump in the Road. Stacie, welcome to Bump in the Road. If you would, tell us your story.
Hi, Pat. Thanks. So happy to be here with you today. I think that we'll talk about my most recent bump in the road. I've had many over the course of my lifetime. I'm 67 now, and that was the implosion of my marriage after 28 years, and it was a bit of a surprise. It was something that I initiated, but not anything that I ever imagined would happen, right? And I talked to a lot of women really that are in that situation. And I personally felt like Humpty Dumpty, right? That had fallen off the wall and shattered into a million little pieces. And I wondered, how would I ever assemble all of those pieces back together into a happy, healthy human being? And you can. I mean, you can absolutely soar beyond divorce to create your next chapter.
It's kind of like the Japanese art of kintsugi, where they use like a gold to reassemble a vase or a ceramic piece that's broken. And the idea is that as the light comes through the broken pieces, the gold glows, and it's not only prettier but stronger than it was before.
Yes. And, there is so much truth to that, really. It's such a beautiful analogy. I know for myself, I went through a couple of years and, we're not taught how to get through these kinds of situations in our lives, right? So I was doing everything that I thought I was supposed to be doing, right? I got a home, I had a business that was running, I created a busy social life, all of these sorts of things. And I realized a couple of years in, I mean, it really took me that long to hit the bottom, to where I just got tired of my own BS. Really, I realized that I was angry. I was so angry and resentful inside still, that even though the outside looked good, my anger and resentment was really causing me to adopt some habits that were not going to be sustainable for me for the long term. And it was a long marriage, and it was a good marriage in many, many ways. And I have overcome the grief. And what I realized is that the anger, it took me a bit. We don't have a really good vocabulary around emotions. We're just not taught that
Nope.
either. And I realized that it really was grief, right? And And what was I grieving? I was grieving the loss of a long marriage, of a commitment and vows that we had made, of something that a future that I had imagined would be. And all of that vanished very, very quickly. There was no room for reconciliation or anything. So implosion is really the best word that I can use to describe it, because my entire life blew up.
You talk about a loss of a future. I think that's a huge piece of the grief because I know in my case, I was living for a tomorrow that never happened. What was I doing today?
Yes, yes. And it's difficult, it's difficult to regain that footing. And as I mentioned, I thought I was doing all of the sort of right things. And it finally occurred to me that I was not I was not being intentional, right? I have reinvented myself so many times over my lifetime. It's just one of the things I tend to do anyway, about every 10 years. And all of my recreations have been intentional to some degree, right? I had a goal and something I wanted to head toward. And I realized that I had lost sight of what that goal could be, right? So I describe in one of my early books, the stories in a compilation book that I did. I really realized that I no longer wanted to be that leaf just flowing downstream and bumping into rocks and going wherever the tide took me. I needed to get in my own little boat and row the oars and figure out what I wanted and be intentional about that, and really start driving myself to seek the outcomes that I wanted to create in my life.
How do you start to explore what you really want?
Well, you know, peace of mind, I think, is one of our greatest assets in the world. I think it is one of our greatest personal assets. Um, the prerequisite for that, I believe, is knowledge. And it's not just learning what is outside, right? We need to start to see what is outside of our worldview that is so heavily influenced by our culture, by our beliefs, our upbringing, all of these things. And a lot of that terminology is overused, but it is true, right? When we widen our perspective and our vision and start learning what hasn't been taught us or taught to us, and then we really begin to understand that and explore within ourselves, and then begin to embody the change we want to see, that's when miracles happen.
And I think part of that change is actually stripping away all the things that society tells us we should be.
It is. I went all in on a personal development journey. And that was, let's see, 2012 was when we got divorced, and it was probably around 2014 when I really stuck my toe into that pool and said I need to do something. And I got very, very proactive. I'd almost be embarrassed to tell you how much money I spent on personal development. And for me, I'm one of those people. It served me very, very well in a number of careers, as well as the coaching that I do now. But I'm one of those people that naturally sees the big picture and the details and the patterns all at once. So, although my journey was invigorated by my desire to better understand my situation and craft my future, I had this whole other component. Don't ask me where it came from. I guess just guidance, and that's how I got here with modern consciousness as well. But I had this whole other component that I really wanted to understand human nature, at this much broader level. And so I sought about learning that. And I learned a lot about myself in the process. I learned a lot about our humanness in the process. And it's just been a remarkable adventure. I'm a completely different person than I was 10 years ago.
How are you different?
I don't get triggered. Generally, I'm keenly aware of everything that goes on around me, to as much as I can be. I notice my thoughts. I explore them with open curiosity. I try not to judge myself too harshly. That's a big one for us all to overcome. Also try to be compassionate and not judge others so harshly. Um, and the other secret for me is being fully engaged in whatever I'm doing. If I'm at the grocery store, I'm enjoying being at the grocery store. My assistant says, "You're so happy when you're here. You're dancing, you're blah, blah, this, you're blah, blah, that." She happens to be with me. And I'm like, well, I am, because I'm enjoying the process. I love to cook, so I love to do the shopping. And the difference between us is, and this I think is so important for people, is that most people habitually focus on either what they're worrying about,
Mhm.
right? And I've released worry, 98.8% of worry. And so they're either worried about worry, or they're worried about, their brain space is taken up about what they have to do next, what they have to do the rest of the day. So by doing that, you rob yourself of the joy of the moment.
Absolutely. And the key is being present in the present moment, because that's where you create. I mean, if you're in the future or in the past, you've missed the moment totally. And how many missed moments do you have in your life?
Yeah, we miss a lot until we expand our knowledge and start embodying what we learn, right? We have to put that knowledge to use in order for it to make a difference in our lives.
You talked about witnessing your thoughts. Talk about that a little, because I think that's an incredibly important part of our evolution. And it's really part of the evolution towards greater consciousness.
It truly is. Let me see. Just an easy example. So I was driving the other day, and someone from the right lane decided to turn left. So they went across two lanes of traffic into the left turn lane. And I was paying attention. That thank goodness mom taught me to be a defensive driver, but I was paying attention. Because I was present and paying attention, I wasn't in any danger, and they were in less danger, right? Because I was paying attention to what I was doing. I wasn't talking or, texting or any number of things. And I had, it was one of those moments where, and I have these moments all the time where I stop and go, "Wow, Stace, you've done it." Because I didn't get triggered. I didn't yell at them. I didn't give anybody an international signal. I just thought, "Gosh, honey, God bless you. I hope you get where you're going safely." I live in a tourist area. I live on Siesta Key. People don't know where they're going necessarily. They're in a rush. They've got somebody else yelling at them in the car. "You need to turn left here. You need to turn left." Um, and what I really realized was the importance of experiencing grace in the moment. I gave them grace. I have goosebumps as I say that to you. And the difference in that is it also gives us grace, right? I didn't My amygdala didn't activate. I didn't My heart rate didn't go up. I didn't go into stress reaction mode. I was just very calm through the whole situation. And I actually came home, and a few days later I wrote a blog about it, or an article. It might have been an article that I submitted to Brains Magazine. I think that's what it was, because that's how we notice our thoughts, right? So converse to that. If you notice, two things that helped me tremendously, and I'm sure you've read the little book. It's the little powerful book, The Four Agreements.
Oh, yeah.
And there's two things in there, right? Notice what offends you and don't make assumptions. So those are two practices that I adopted very, very early on, in noticing what offended me and exploring it. Handling this, trying to handle the situation a little bit better. Trust me, I didn't always with my ex-husband. happened early on. But even out in public or whatever. So just kind of going, that's really interesting that offended me. Now, it offended something within me, right? The other person may have lack of communication skills. It could be their, whatever. But the offense is mine. So that's mine to solve.
Mhm.
And so just exploring those with open curiosity. And if you can't in the moment, jot it down. I encourage my clients, just jot that down and think about it later. And the same thing with assumptions. I've found that when we're assuming something, we are putting into that situation, what's actually being reflected to us, or what we're projecting. There's the word I'm looking at. Are not only our beliefs, but our outlook on life, right? If we constantly assume that the worst thing is always going to happen, we probably have a pretty pessimistic view overall. So it's a really interesting exercise to take those thoughts and notice them, because we have, oh gosh, what do they say? Like 70,000 thoughts a day, and 95% of those are in our subconscious. We don't even know they're there, but they do give us clues, and they pop in these strange ways,
Yep.
And that's what I mean. Stop and notice those, but don't dismiss it, explore it.
Well, and it also goes back to something you mentioned earlier, and that's judgment. Judgment really is a judgment of ourselves more than anything else. And I think when we start to come to see that, it's very interesting to look at your belief system. Why do you believe that? Why do you judge this way or that? I mean, it's
Mm-hmm.
kind of an interesting rabbit hole to go down.
Yeah, it really is. And it's such a valuable use of our time, because in order to, it goes faster if you're guided, most often, right? If you're, however that is, if you're reading, if you're learning, if you're intently exploring, if you're trying out new tools, if you've been to a seminar or what have you. But really practicing it, if we don't change what we're doing, or what we're thinking about, or what our beliefs are, or whatever, if nothing changes. So we cannot affect positive change in our life unless we do it intentionally and expand our perspective.
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, I have a vision board and digital vision board, and on it I have a little scroll that says, "If you don't," something along the lines of, "If you don't change, nothing will change."
Right, right.
And it's so true. It's so true. So, when you hit a bump like a divorce, it just tears your life apart. What are some of the key steps in terms of putting it back together? And I realize reassembling your life takes years. And to some extent, it's even an ongoing process because you're constantly recreating. But what are some of the key things that people need to look at?
I think first of all, I think it's very beneficial to understand the grieving process as it relates to divorce. First of all, it gives us some context of what to expect. And I think we need to love ourselves through it. I believe that, I have a very joyful outlook most of the time. And it doesn't mean that I don't have things that happen that hurt or upset me, or, any number of things, right? And you have to also honor those emotions, right? You have to honor them and move them through you, not stuff it and let it get stuck there.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I think that's very, very important to do that. I think understanding the process, we have to come to an acceptance of it, and we have to step out of the story. If we keep telling ourselves the story that we're a victim, we're going to live the life of a victim. That becomes our worldview about everything. We project that onto everything.
That is so true. And that is not where you want to be.
No, it's not very healthy. It ruins all of your other relationships. The negative impact is so widespread. I have actually a very, very good example I can share. I also, another big bump was I lost my first child. And he was everything was fine until it wasn't. He was born with some issues. He never did make it home from the hospital. They never prepared me for that. They said he would be fine. But anyway, he died at about a month old. And that was one of the most, it was a very, one of the most difficult things
Mm.
I've ever been through. I think my divorce knocked me even harder than that, which sounds crazy to people, but it's also been 30 years since that happened. And the other side of that really is that I didn't lose my confidence when I lost the baby, right? I was sad and grieving, but my divorce, I really lost a lot of myself, right? Oh, who am I? You know, our image, losing our self confidence, you know, a number of things. It would just take hours and hours to talk about. But my doctor recommended that I go to a grief counseling for parents that had lost children, and I went to one meeting, and I was a little ways along. Right, it's not something you do 3 days after an event like that. Right, it was probably a couple of months. I had a good deal of recovering to do. And in that meeting, there were a variety of families, and all of the circumstances of their children's death and the ages all differed, right? From uh, health issues like my child had, or murder. I mean, there was, you know,
Wow.
across the gamut. And there was a gentleman there that spoke. And his wife was not with him. And it had been 5 years since their child died, and his wife still was unable to leave the house and go to the grocery store.
Mhm.
And I felt so much compassion for her and for anybody experiencing that. Oh my gosh, my heart goes out to you. It really, really does. It's I called the death of my child going to hell, and I came out, right? I walked through the fire and I came out the other side. And I understand that not everybody's able to do that. But I was like, you know, I don't want to be there in 5 years. I don't want to be in 5 years where I was at that day. So overcome with grief that I didn't really know how to move through it. And it's a horrible, horrible situation. It's a very difficult situation to navigate. That really stuck in my mind. And the other thing that I took away from that was, wow, so these other parents had all these memories with their children. You know, some of them, some had died as infants, but some had, you know, anywhere from 3 years to 10, 12 years of memories
Mm.
with their children. And while I realized that I would never have those memories, and I felt sad about that, somehow in my mind, I also realized that in a lot of ways, that was a blessing for me at that time, if that makes any sense to anybody.
It makes total sense.
And those, it's the only meeting I ever went to. And those two things were my biggest, you know, were my biggest takeaways. And I did have some supportive people around me, right? My husband at the time was supportive. You know, my parents were supportive. So I did have a support network. But that is when I really realized that, again, if a change was going to happen and I was not going to stay in that dreadful, dreadful space of grief, it's just heart wrenching that I was really the only one to do anything about it.
That's a really wise observation in a really difficult situation.
Thank you. Thank you. It was awful. And through my divorce, I kept telling myself, excuse me, if I can survive the death of that child, I can survive this, right? If I could survive that, I could survive this. It still took me a bit to really you know, really recover. You know, 28 years is a long time, and it takes a while to figure out what your next move is and what you want to aim for. You know, really what you want to aim for, I think.
Well, and how you're going to respond, it's a choice, but it takes a while to sift through all the debris to figure out how you want to respond. It is not a slam dunk. And, I think, I don't know if trauma ever totally leaves us. I think it can be minimized. I think that you can come to terms with it. You can certainly rationalize it away, but it's emotional. And I think that it's really important to do our very best to resolve these situations because if we don't, they will absolutely bubble up again and again and again in our lives until we do.
I 100% agree with that. Yes.
But do you ever totally get rid of that trauma, do you think?
Um, I think there's bits of sadness probably that remain. And then there's a lot of joy. There's a lot of joy. I mean, with my divorce, I would not be where I am today and who I am today if I was still married.
Yeah.
And then there's a matter of being able to step into forgiveness, and I think that's very, very important. And it's so misinterpreted. Forgiveness doesn't mean that we condone what anybody else did or didn't do. It's not for the other person, it's for ourselves. And then with my son, I couldn't even attend a funeral for years. If I went to a funeral, even of a stranger, all of that bubbled out. And I finally, through some of my training, I believe, with my theta healing training, really released the rest of that and moved it out and moved it through. But I also had a very unusual experience in that years later, my son came to me. He walked into the bedroom one night while I was sleeping, and he was the size that he would be had he aged to that age. Right. So he didn't come in a form of an infant when I lost him and what I knew, but I knew it was him when he came in the room. And it was essentially to let me know that I'm fine. I'm fine. And life is so unusual because if we don't have certain experiences, we're not able to support others through similar experiences, right? Because we haven't had it ourselves. So I reframe that to a blessing rather than a tragedy. Um, does it mean I maybe would not have liked it to turn out differently? No, no, not it's not that. But do you understand what I'm saying? It's a matter of changing the story so that it supports our highest and best.
And I think forgiveness is a big part of that. I think recognizing we're all very imperfect. And at a point in time, somebody maybe just be doing the best they can do. And it may be look kind of horrific, but it's where they are. And I think
Yes,
you have to have forgiveness for that and let it go because carrying it with you will only hurt you.
it colors everything we do.
Yeah.
And I learned a lot about that, to have compassion for other people when I was grieving the death of my son, right? Because you have somebody, the clerk says hi to you at the grocery store and she's all chipper and friendly and you're in this deep grief. You don't
Oh,
necessarily feel like talking up a conversation. And it really, the experience really came home to me that we really don't, we've seen the meme, some of us have the t-shirt, right? But we really don't understand until we've been there, truly understand. And we don't know what someone else is going through. If they snap at you, probably has nothing to do with you.
no, it only has to do with where they are in their lives.
Mm-hmm.
I think that we can cross some experiential barriers by tuning into the emotion. For example, isolation is an emotion or a situation that most of us have experienced at one point or another and can probably understand. And same with grief, although there are so many different types of grief and depths of grief, but grief is grief, no matter whether it's a child or, forgive me, I'm not trying to cast any illusions with this in any way, but or a pet or, a parent or a friend. It's all grief when they leave.
Yes, and it's all the same process.
Yeah, it really is. And I know. listening to so many people's stories, I think it boils down to finding the emotion. And if you can connect with the emotion, you can be supportive towards somebody.
Yes, yes, I agree with that. I agree with that. And that's, yeah, it's part of what I teach as well, because our emotional vocabulary, as I said earlier, is really so slim.
Oh,
Sometimes
it's
we think it's
abysmal.
one emotion, but it's really a deeper emotion that indicates something else. And it's there's some great books out there people can read, or what have you. But yeah, it's the emotional landscape is a very interesting place. The emotional wheel is a really good little tool.
The Harvard recently put out a study where they named a number of different emotions, and I was stunned at the whole range of just lists and lists they had. And I found it so interesting. It goes exactly to what you were saying, and that is that we lack the vocabulary to even tackle these things.
Yes. And again, that's where knowledge comes into play, right? To really understand, and we really need to understand, what are we feeling exactly, and what is it? And then why are we feeling that way?
And I think getting help through the process is really important.
It is. It's I've had help. I have my own coach now, right? I mean, it's good to have someone that you trust and value, that knows you, but can also be objective and is
Yep.
supportive, in your corner. It's really good to have that support.
If you could rewrite your story, would you?
No, somebody's asked me that before, and and I could even remember discussions, with my family, because I went a little rogue in the 70s. I'm that
I went a little rogue in the 90s. I was a slow learner.
age. Yeah, so um I really wouldn't, because I would not be who I am without all of that experience. I count myself fortunate to have a mind that explores. I count myself fortunate to have a mind that is analytical. It's one of my blessings. And in my ability to look at things, it doesn't mean I always use it that way. But yeah, no, I really don't think that I would change anything. It's part of who I am. It's all contributed to my growth.